So we're officially into Season 1 for the War Within, giving us access to a host of old and current dungeons, with upgraded loot and the new tier system for delves. But the main attraction being the brand spanking new raid, Nerub-ar Palace, or a pronunciation to that extent, filled with creepy ghoulies and many spiders. And I thought, why not take a look at the new raid and have a quick chat about some of the first impressions so far. As the War Within got off to a great start, and the only last big question mark was our new spider-filled raid. So let's take a look at Nerub-ar Palace. First up, I think visually the tone of the raid is fantastic. I mean, if you want a raid filled with Nerubians, this is quite literally what you'd want. Ranging from a grand palace filled with 8-legged freaks and plenty of cobwebs, it doesn't paint the Nerubians as some cave-dwelling stupid insects, as they certainly aren't. The raid itself shows how grand the Nerubians are amongst their impressive empire, but it does feel like they've done up with some Halloween decorations along the way. And how you progress through the raid does really remind me a little of the Burning Throne in Legion, as you have a flight system to take you to various wings of the raid as you progress. And boy, is this place absolutely huge. And to put it into context, I never have lag issues in WoW. And boy, did this raid make me feel like I was playing Prime 2007 WoW on a toaster again. I'd assume due to the size of the raid or maybe some issues with phasing, I was lagging all over the place in my first time in the raid. But things did clean up the further you got into the actual palace section of the raid after the first 3 or 4 bosses, where the general aesthetic and experience of progressing into the palace, I would argue, is pretty satisfactory. And the grandness of venturing into the palace really does make this raid feel, well, very raidy. Much like storming Icecrown Citadel or Aberrus, it feels particularly huge in its own nature. So moving on to the boss fights. Now I didn't raid on the beta for the War Within, so this was my first experience of Nerub-ar Palace. Yet like any keen raider, obviously I went and watched a lot of the tactics videos prior to running through it. And to be honest, there are tactics you need to learn for a lot of the bosses, such as even on the first boss, feeding it bugs so you can continue to actually do damage. Something that no matter how many times you say to your fellow players, it gets left to about 5 people to do, as everyone else does no damage to the boss, wondering what on earth is happening. But realistically, I found that the tactics videos felt somewhat intimidating, as there is a lot to keep track of. However, once you're in there and actually learning the fights, they're super easy to get a hold of. That is until you make it to the council, the penultimate boss of the raid. And my lord, did I wipe on this boss until you nail it down. Mostly because there is so much going on visually. Once you actually boil it down to what you need to do, the fight is fairly easy to get to grips with. It's just about execution. Generally speaking, I really enjoyed the boss fights in the raid. I think at times there is a bit of a risk going backwards though. As in retail, a big criticism, certainly by the end of Shadowlands, is that you almost couldn't tell what on earth was going on your screen at times, as there were simply too many pointless mechanics or visuals happening at one time that were unnecessary. Dragonflight really did clear this up a lot, especially in Aberrus and Emergisil, where bosses felt like they just had mechanics that mattered and you didn't get too much screen clutter. However, in the palace there are a few bosses where it's hard to tell what on earth is even going on, as there was so much random splash damage that effectively did nothing, or bright visuals that were simply confusing and didn't have any impact, and it did worry me slightly in that sense. However, playing into that also is that we aren't fully familiar with the raid yet, so over time I assume this will go away a bit, but it did feel like almost teetering on that line with a few bosses, where it's going back to the old over-the-top ways of retail a few years ago, but nothing too major, so hopefully this is calmed down by the next raid. And finally, let's chat about some of the gear in the raid visually. Now for me, I'm currently maining a Frost Death Knight, and let me tell you, the second I got any piece of my tier set, it got transmogged instantly, as I really do despise how the tier sets look for this raid from a very salty point of view. And whilst there are some gear drops that look cool, personally I'm not so keen on the loot from a visual aspect. I think the exception to the rule are the weapons for this raid, which all look very voidy, Nerubian inspired, and I do think they look pretty awesome. But as far as armor sets go, it's a big miss for me. I mean, if you think back to the DK tier set for Naxxramas in Wrath, that looks more like it should be from a Nerubian raid than the current set does, due to the Nerubian inspired bosses in Naxx obviously. But I mean, I'd have been happy to get a basically copy-paste version of the Naxx DK tier set for the specific Nerub-ar Palace raid, as I'm not really sure what's going on with these tier sets, but you can't win them all, I guess. But overall, I'm happy that this is our new raid and how we're settling into things. I was a bit worried as I'd got fairly hyped over how much I've been enjoying the War Within. I was hoping that the raid would really be good too, as there's always the worry that a stinker is on the way once things are going well. And in Dragonflight, from my opinion, the raids only got better with each release. So if we're following suit in the War Within, we're off to a pretty good start, I'd say. But there are some first impressions as we kick off Season 1. Be sure to let me know how you're getting on in the new raid and where you're up to in the War Within so far in the comments below. As always though, take care out there, and I'll see you on the next one. Ta-ra for now.
As always, if you're new here, feel free to like and subscribe. And on that note, I think I'll say ta-ra for now, and I'll see you later.